The music, the costumes, the hair. There's only one ABBA. And after decades of going their
After 4 long decades, one of the world's most beloved pop groups has finally returned. ABBA, the Swedish icons who once dominated global charts, are back with a new studio album. For millions of fans around the world, the anticipation has been almost unbearable. And if that wasn't enough, a sequel to the blockbuster musical Mamma Mia is on its way, promising to bring ABBA's timeless hits to the big screen once again. The new film, Here We Go Again, promises to explore the events that led up to the original story, a prequel of sorts, diving deep into the lives of the band members before they ended up on the picturesque Greek island that captured the hearts of fans everywhere. The excitement is palpable, but beneath the glittery exterior of sequels and comebacks, there is a story rarely told. For years, fans speculated about the private lives of ABBA's iconic couples, Benny Andersson and Frida Lyngstad and Björn Ulvaeus and Agnetha Fältskog. The public saw perfection, glamour, and musical genius, but the reality behind the scenes was far more complex. In a rare and candid interview, Benny Andersson finally opened up about the heartbreak that quietly unfolded during the peak of ABBA's fame. He revealed that the pressures of stardom, creative differences, and personal choices slowly eroded the love he shared with Frida. What started as an inspiring partnership in music and life eventually became a story of separation and sorrow. And now, decades later, ABBA fans are finally seeing both the triumphant comeback and the human story that fueled the music. Tonight, we take you behind the sequins, the stages, and the chart-topping hits. Tonight, we explore the truth about love, fame, and the sacrifices made in the name of music. This is a story about ABBA, not just the band that gave us unforgettable songs, but the people who lived, loved, and lost behind the spotlight. Benny and Frida first crossed paths in 1969, long before ABBA became the global phenomenon we know today. At the time, Frida Lyngstad was steadily making a name for herself in Sweden's folk music scene. Her fiery red hair and powerhouse voice made her stand out at local performances, festivals, and small venues across the country. Meanwhile, Benny Andersson had already tasted fame as the keyboardist of the Hep Stars, a band often compared to Sweden's version of the Beatles. It was at a music festival that Benny first noticed Frida. There was an undeniable spark, a mix of admiration and curiosity. She wasn't just talented. She had an intensity and independence that seemed to radiate from every performance. For Benny, it was immediately clear that Frida was someone special, someone who could match his musical ambitions. And for Frida, Benny represented a partner who understood her love for music in a way no one else ever had. Their connection was instantaneous. Together they began experimenting with melodies and harmonies, refining songs that would later become part of ABBA's signature sound. While Björn and Agnetha often took center stage as the band's public couple, Benny and Frida worked quietly behind the scenes, building the musical foundation that would propel ABBA to international stardom. By the early 1970s, their partnership had become both personal and professional. They were dreamers chasing the same ambitious goal, creating music that would leave an indelible mark on the world. In interviews years later, Frida reflected on those early days with warmth, describing Benny as someone who not only shared her passion for music, but also challenged her creatively, pushing her to explore the depths of her talent. As ABBA slowly took shape, the world had yet to witness the storm brewing behind the glittering costumes and infectious pop hits. While fans celebrated their early successes, the seeds of tension were quietly being sown, setting the stage for one of pop music's most famous love stories to face trials that no stage could ever prepare them for. By the mid-1970s, Benny and Frida's relationship had deepened alongside ABBA's meteoric rise. The pair wasn't just a couple, they were collaborators, partners in the truest sense. Benny had a natural gift for crafting melodies, while Frida brought raw emotion to every note she sang. Together, they created songs that were more than just chart-topping hits. They were expressions of their shared experiences, joys, and struggles. Frida often described the early days of their romance as magical. "Meeting Benny just felt right," she said in a Swedish magazine interview from 1975. "He understood music the way no one else did, and he inspired me to be my best." For Benny, it wasn't merely about Frida's talent. Her energy, independence, and unfiltered passion were intoxicating. Unlike anyone he had worked with before, Frida challenged him, encouraged him, and at the same time, offered a safe space for vulnerability. Together, they became an invisible engine for ABBA's success. While Björn and Agnetha were in the spotlight, Benny and Frida were crafting the melodies, harmonies, and arrangements that would define the band. Their synergy was undeniable. It was a delicate balance of discipline and spontaneity. Benny meticulously refined every note, every chord, while Frida's instinctive and emotive singing breathed life into the music. However, even in the midst of creativity and apparent harmony, cracks began to appear. The pressures of fame, constant touring, and media attention started to weigh heavily. The very qualities that had once drawn them together, Benny's perfectionism and Frida's emotional spontaneity, began to create tension. What was once their strength was slowly becoming a challenge, a subtle friction threatening to disturb the fragile equilibrium of their relationship. Despite the challenges, the early success of ABBA felt like a shared victory. They were partners in love and music, achieving more than either could have imagined. Yet as the band's fame grew, so did the expectations and pressures that would eventually test the limits of their partnership. As ABBA exploded onto the international stage in the mid-1970s, the pressures of fame began to take their toll. Benny, a perfectionist, spent endless hours in the studio, obsessing over every detail of songwriting and arrangement. Frida, on the other hand, thrived on spontaneity, improvisation, and emotion-driven performance. What had once been a complementary balance now increasingly led to conflict. The differences weren't limited to music. Benny preferred a quiet life away from the public eye, retreating into the sanctuary of studio walls. Frida conversely relished the social aspects of celebrity, the parties, the public appearances, the interactions with fans. Slowly, the harmony that had once defined their partnership began to fray, unnoticed by the outside world. Friends and bandmates began to observe tension, particularly during grueling world tours. Even their creative spark, the very force that had drawn them together, began to wane. The once seamless collaboration between Benny and Frida now required careful navigation, delicate compromises, and sometimes silent disagreements. By the late 1970s, it was clear that fame had become a double-edged sword. While ABBA's music captivated audiences worldwide, the cost to the personal relationships within the band was becoming impossible to ignore. Benny and Frida were not just musicians in the public eye. They were human beings struggling to maintain love under relentless scrutiny. By 1979, the cracks in Benny and Frida's relationship were impossible to ignore. They had spent nearly a decade together, building a life and career intertwined with ABBA's rise. Yet the pressures of fame, personal differences, and growing emotional distance had quietly built a barrier that neither could ignore. The tipping point came in early 1981. Benny admitted to Frida that he had developed feelings for Mona Nlet, a television worker he had met during an ABBA TV special. The revelation was devastating. For Frida, it wasn't just the pain of lost love. It felt like a betrayal of everything they had built together, both personally and professionally. Despite their efforts to maintain a professional relationship for the band's sake, the personal heartbreak was impossible to contain. In an open interview with Expressen in May 1981, Benny recounted the unraveling of their relationship. His hands trembled as he tried to articulate the heartbreak, the confusion, and the inevitability of their separation. "I don't know how people navigate moments like this," he whispered. His voice, barely audible, carried the weight of love lost under the glare of public attention. Frida, meanwhile, displayed a quiet resilience in her own interviews. She refused to dwell on bitterness, instead choosing to focus on new beginnings and personal growth. She spoke of finding comfort and love again, proving that heartbreak, while devastating, could also lead to self-discovery. The breakup didn't just affect their personal lives, it changed ABBA forever. Songs that once felt lighthearted and celebratory now carried undertones of sorrow and reflection. Tracks like "The Winner Takes It All" resonated more deeply for those aware of the story behind the lyrics. ABBA's music continued, but the dynamic that had fueled their rise had fundamentally shifted. The public, largely unaware of the private turmoil, continued to celebrate ABBA's music. Yet behind the dazzling performances, heartbreak lingered like a shadow, influencing every note, every lyric, and every harmony. While the world saw golden couples performing dazzling hits, the reality behind the scenes was starkly different. The contrast between ABBA's public image and their private lives was profound. Friends, reporters, and fans noted the tension that underlay even their most polished appearances. The heartbreak of Benny and Frida, alongside the challenges faced by Björn and Agnetha, began to seep into their music. Songs that were once purely celebratory now carried a melancholy undercurrent. The band's signature optimism was tinged with reflection, loss, and quiet sadness. Reporters like Lars Johansson of Expressen uncovered glimpses of this reality, documenting interviews that revealed the struggles hidden beneath ABBA's glittering exterior. For the first time, the public was offered a candid look at the human stories behind the music, stories of love lost, emotional endurance, and the cost of fame. Even as ABBA continued to release hits, the personal sacrifices and heartbreaks remained a quiet, constant presence, a reminder that even pop icons are vulnerable to the challenges of love, ambition, and public scrutiny. Before fame and heartbreak, Frida's story began in post-war Norway in 1945. Born to a Norwegian mother and a German soldier, she entered a world still healing from conflict. Her very existence carried a stigma. War children faced rejection, hostility, and prejudice. Her mother, determined to provide a safer future, moved with Frida to Sweden, settling in the small town of Torsby. Life was far from easy. Frida's mother worked tirelessly as a seamstress, struggling to create a sense of stability for her daughter. Yet despite adversity, music became Frida's refuge. Her voice carried not only talent but also emotion, maturity, and resilience far beyond her years. By the age of 11, she was performing at local events, her presence commanding attention. Her early experiences shaped her strength, independence, and empathy, qualities that would later define her both as a performer and as a person navigating the complexities of fame and love. Music was more than a career. It was survival, expression, and identity. As ABBA's rise approached, Frida carried with her a lifetime of struggle, resilience, and determination. Her journey from outcast to international pop icon was marked by courage, vulnerability, and an unwavering dedication to her craft. In the years following the breakup, both Benny and Frida found new paths. Frida embraced love again, though cautiously, while Benny poured himself into his music, continuing to innovate and create. ABBA's legacy endured, not just through their hits but through the deeply human stories embedded within them. The band eventually reunited decades later, fulfilling the dreams of countless fans. Yet the story behind the music remains as poignant as ever, a tale of love, heartbreak, ambition, and resilience. Songs that once defined joy now carry a deeper emotional resonance, reflecting the human experiences that shaped their creators. ABBA's story reminds us that behind every glittering stage, every chart-topping hit lies a world of struggles, sacrifices, and personal triumphs. It's a testament to the enduring power of music, the complexity of love, and the resilience of the human spirit. Tonight, as fans around the world celebrate their reunion and new music, the story of Benny and Frida of love found, lost, and transformed resonates more than ever. It is a story of humanity, brilliance, and the bittersweet reality that even the brightest stars are not immune to heartbreak. While ABBA's public performances were flawless, the reality in the studio was a world apart. Benny Andersson, with his obsessive perfectionism, would often spend hours alone at the piano, tweaking chord progressions and melodies until they felt exactly right. Frida, on the other hand, thrived on emotion and spontaneity, preferring to sing freely and let the music take its natural course. Their creative clashes were subtle at first. Benny would insist, "Do it this way, the phrasing needs to match the emotion precisely," while Frida would counter, "But it feels too rigid. Let it breathe." It was this tension, however, that birthed some of ABBA's most iconic songs. The Winner Takes It All and When All Is Said and Done were not just products of inspiration. They were products of compromise, understanding, and the delicate dance of two brilliant artists learning to work together despite differences. Touring added another layer of complexity. Long hours, jet lag, and constant media attention created a pressure cooker environment. Friends and collaborators would notice subtle signs: Frida's quiet frustration after rehearsals, Benny's late-night sessions at the piano, the unspoken tension in between songs. Yet despite it all, they maintained a professional front. Every performance was perfect. every note precise, masking the turmoil simmering just below the surface. Even the choice of songs for live performances could become a battleground. Benny would carefully weigh which tracks resonated with audiences and which ones told their story, while Frida sometimes pushed for songs that reflected raw emotion rather than commercial appeal. It was this push and pull that shaped ABBA's musical identity, a fusion of precision and feeling, of perfection and passion. Fans rarely realized the emotional labor behind the music. The studio, with its bright lights and polished recordings, was both a sanctuary and a battleground. Here dreams were forged, conflicts played out, and the foundation of pop history was laid, one note at a time. As ABBA's fame skyrocketed in the late 1970s, the world began to see them not just as musicians, but as icons. The tours were massive, spanning Europe, North America, and eventually the world. Yet behind the sequins and dazzling lights, the personal toll was significant. Frida and Benny's private tensions were often masked by smiles and impeccable performances, but the signs were visible to those closest to them. Long flights, media interviews, and relentless schedules left little room for private conversations or emotional connection. During these tours, Benny would retreat to hotel rooms to compose and arrange, while Frida often sought moments with fans or quiet walks to process her own feelings. Tour diaries and memoirs from collaborators reveal that even minor disagreements in the studio could escalate on tour. A song lyric, a lighting choice, or even a wardrobe selection could become points of contention. Yet these challenges were overshadowed by the euphoria of performing for thousands of fans every night. The stage became both a refuge and a trap, a place where personal conflicts were temporarily suspended, replaced by the collective energy of the crowd. For Benny, the tours were a test of endurance. He loved music but disliked the trappings of fame. Frida, meanwhile, embraced the connection with fans, relishing the applause, the admiration, and the emotional feedback. This difference, once a source of attraction, now highlighted the growing distance between them. In hindsight, Benny often described the period as a mixture of triumph and tragedy. He loved Frida deeply, yet the demands of perfection and the relentless pace of ABBA's success left him emotionally exhausted. In rare interviews, he confessed, "I didn't realize how much pressure I was putting on us, on myself, and on our relationship. I thought love and music could coexist without conflict. I was wrong." Benny's meticulous nature, which fueled the band's success, also became a source of strain. Every studio session, every live performance, every album release was carefully measured against an internal standard that few could comprehend. Frida's more instinctive approach sometimes clashed with this vision, creating friction that was inevitable given the stakes. He also reflected on the heartbreak of seeing a relationship dissolve in public. "It's one thing to have a private disagreement," he said, "but when the world is watching, every glance, every silence is scrutinized. The pain is magnified." Yet even in these reflections there is humility. Benny recognized that both he and Frida had given everything, emotionally and creatively, to ABBA, and that their legacy would forever be intertwined with both their love and their loss. Frida's reflections offer a complementary perspective, one marked by resilience and grace. While Benny focused on precision, Frida focused on the heart of the music. The heartbreak of their separation was profound, but she often emphasized personal growth. "Love changes you," she once said, "but it doesn't have to define you. We shared something incredible, and that will always remain." Her post-breakup journey included self-discovery, new relationships, and a deeper understanding of her own priorities. Music remained central, but she approached it with renewed independence. The very pain that once threatened to break her became a source of artistic inspiration, evident in the raw emotion of subsequent recordings and live performances. Fans who listened closely could hear these shifts. There was a subtle evolution in her voice, an added depth, a quiet melancholy, and an understanding of emotional nuance that only experience can bring. Through it all, Frida remained composed, refusing to allow public speculation to overshadow her personal growth. While ABBA's internal struggles unfolded behind the scenes, the world continued to celebrate the band's music. Fans were enamored by the catchy melodies, the glittering costumes, and the undeniable charisma of the group. Yet few knew the personal sacrifices that went into creating each hit. Fan letters, interviews, and testimonials reveal how deeply ABBA's songs resonated. For many, the music became a soundtrack to their lives, Moments of joy, heartbreak, and celebration intertwined with ABBA's harmonies. Dancing Queen, for instance, wasn't just a song. It was an anthem of liberation and joy. Yet for Benny and Frida, performing it night after night often came with a bittersweet undertone, a reminder of the personal challenges behind the glamour. Internationally, ABBA became more than just a band. They were cultural icons. Their influence extended beyond music into fashion, film, and television. The sequins, the platform shoes, and the vibrant stage designs became symbols of an era, inspiring countless artists and fans across generations. Yet as their global fame soared, the weight of expectations also increased. Every move, every album, every live appearance was dissected by fans, journalists, and critics alike. Despite the pressures, ABBA's ability to connect with audiences worldwide never waned. The emotional depth of their music, born from both love and heartbreak, struck chords with fans who could sense the authenticity behind the polished performances. It was a reminder that even in pop music, human experiences, love, loss, resilience remain universal, transcending borders and languages. Decades later, the world witnessed something many thought impossible. ABBA reunited. After 35 years, Benny, Frida, Björn, and Agnetha came together, not just for nostalgic performances, but for new music that reflected both their past and their evolution as artists. Fans who had grown up with ABBA, and a new generation discovering them for the first time, celebrated the return of the iconic quartet. The reunion was more than just a musical comeback. It was a statement of resilience. Time had healed old wounds, and while the heartbreaks of the past remained a part of their story, they no longer defined the band's present. The new album carried echoes of their signature sound, while also incorporating reflections on life, maturity, and personal growth. Songs hinted at nostalgia, loss, and the enduring power of love, reminding listeners that ABBA's music was always deeply human, even when it seemed purely celebratory. Critics and fans alike noted the emotional resonance of the reunion. The band's performances were polished yet imbued with a vulnerability that came from lived experience. Frida's voice retained its power, Benny's musical arrangements retained their genius, and the chemistry between the members, though different from their youth, was undeniable. The legacy of ABBA extends beyond records sold or awards won. It lies in the stories woven into their music, the fans inspired by their melodies, and the universal truths captured in their lyrics. From the personal struggles of Benny and Frida to the global joy their songs have brought, ABBA remains an enduring symbol of how music can capture both the brilliance and fragility of the human experience. Their story, filled with love, heartbreak, ambition, and triumph, reminds us that behind every stage, every hit, and every glittering costume, there are real people navigating the complexities of life. ABBA's music, both old and new, is a testament to that journey, a celebration of talent, resilience, and the power of the human heart.